The Wood Night is sponsored by I Would Like. I did say that pens could be turned with pretty much any turning tools, and when I posted for some feedback on Reddit and what people wanted to see, one response was turning a pen with a skew, as they hadn't seen that done, or no one does that anymore. I don't know, I can't remember. So in this video I'm going to show you how I turn with a skew, and for pen turning this is actually my preferred tool, although in the previous longer video I did show you how to turn it with a gouge. In this particular case I'm going to be using a 1" or 25mm skew. I prefer a larger skew to a smaller skew. This is just a rectangular or standard skew, not an oval one. Like all tools, the skew will need to be sharpened before we start because a dull tool is dangerous, blah 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 blah. I'll briefly cover sharpening, though I did go into more detail about the whole thing in the sharpening video. This is the true grind jig, and it will also do skews. Like other tools being sharpened with the true grind jig, you have the same protrusion of 50mm, so I've set that up with the stop block there. You have the forwardmost point on the lower section of the jig, so away from the screw, and you adjust it until the actual blade is relatively parallel with the face of the grinding wheel. Now this will introduce a bit of a camber. I actually prefer that on my skew, so that's a non-issue. If you don't like that, you can certainly sharpen it on a tool rest like this, which will let you get a much straighter profile. So like before, I am just adjusting that until it matches the bevel, and I can get my safety equipment on and start grinding. So I'm actually going to be doing two different pens. One I've already shot and realized the footage wasn't fantastic, and this pen here. They'll be from two different angles, which should hopefully also demonstrate it, but if you see some inconsistencies with what the pen looks like, that's because there's two different pens. So the skew is probably one of the scariest looking tools, simply because it has the least graceful appearance, I think. It can be a tricky tool to use, but once you master it, or at least get the hang of it, you'll be wondering why you don't use it more often. It is possibly the closest in equivalence to the jack plane in the woodworking world, because it can be used for so many different things. You can take very fine shavings, you can use it quite coarsely, you can do flats, and if you're doing a straight line on the lathe, this is the tool to use. Or you can do some really nice curves with it. So the blank is mounted as before, and we're using 3000 RPM just as before, and we need to rough out the blank. So a skew is one of these tools that you can use it 100 different ways, and most of them are right. Key thing in this demo is we're not actually using the points. We're going to be using pretty much this section here, and this is why I prefer the larger skews, so a 1" or larger, because for a 1/2" skew it can be quite difficult to actually get that center point. If we use those 2 points, we do run the risk of having it dig in a little bit. For me, a skew is a series of 45-degree angles. We have the skew out on a 45-degree angle, and it sort of tilts up to about a 45-degree angle to the wood. However, just like with all tools, you can rub the bevel on this and have a lot more control. So you start down lower and raise it up until it starts engaging the wood. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing there. Starting down low, not getting any cutting. Now I'm getting some cutting. And I can keep it at that position and keep cutting away. Now, despite the perhaps crude nature or appearance of the tool, the finish off this is smoother than you'll get off pretty much any other tool, which is why I quite like it. When I was a little bit more practice with the skew and I was doing a lot of pens, I'd use the skew to do everything from start to scratch, and I would start sanding not at 80 or 150 grit, but usually at 200 to 300 grit, because the finish of this was so smooth. The last thing before I really get stuck into this is how you approach the wood ends, so the barrel ends. You can work from almost at the end all the way down to one end, but you won't start into an end. You'll actually need to reverse it and come the other way. So hopefully what you can see is I am rolling the tool as I'm getting to that end to try and get a nice smooth transition. And although you can't feel this, this is the same feeling you'd get off a smoothing plane. It's very, very smooth timber, not anywhere near as coarse as what you'd find on spindle gouge, that sort of thing. So it may be a little bit hard to see, but we're now done here. This is a very smooth finish. I'd probably put it at about 320. However, I would strongly recommend starting at the lower grits, particularly as you're getting a feel for the skew, because there will just be little ripples that you may not be able to see that the sanding will even out. So it may be a good idea just to leave a little bit on the ends here and here, just so you can sand down to that very fine line, and then you don't have to concern yourself with being absolutely precise the very first time you're using a skew. So that's all there is to it. I'm not going to show the whole finishing and sanding and pressing side of it in this video because it's exactly the same, it's just the tool that we've changed. So it doesn't matter what tool you use to turn a pen, use what makes you feel comfortable, or conversely challenge yourself, stick with one tool at a time until you've learnt that tool's ins and outs, then move on to the next tool. So a good idea would be to start with a gouge, then maybe move to a skew, maybe a scraper, all the different tools that you have available to you. Probably the last question would be oval skew or regular straight skew. I don't know, I've never used an oval skew. I believe they are a little bit easier to control and certainly doing that rolling motion, but are a little bit harder to sharpen, but I don't have one, so it doesn't really matter, is probably the point I'm trying to make. Thanks for watching.